Okay, well, thank you for coming. This is a presentation about Chinese police and CloudPets. So, thank you for coming. And I'm the CEO of 70 Security. So, if you are interested, if you find this talk interesting, perhaps you will like to read public pen test reports. So, there's a lot of them that you can read about here for free on 70security.com publications. We have delivered training at Black Hat USA, Hacking the Box, OWASP Global Labs, Technulcon, and others. Maybe some of you know me from Cure53 or version 1, so those were two companies I worked for. Still do things with Cure53 as well. I'm also the co-author of some hands-on 70 security courses, Hacking Android, iOS, and IoT apps by example. There's a workshop. It's not the course, of course, but there's a free workshop that we will do for NanoSec in a couple of days as well. So if you have not registered, maybe you would be interested in that, so you can join that. And then there's a couple of other courses about hacking modern web apps and modern desktop apps. So yeah, and then a while back, I also wrote a course for Alien Security called Practical Web Defense. So this was about finding flaws in web applications and then exploiting the issues and then fixing them and then seeing that the exploit no longer works, right? So yeah, I'm also the one of the OWASP WTF project leaders. So if you type in your browser WTF.org, that takes you to the OWASP page, to that project that you can use for free in your assessments. This is a link to some slides, and then there's some security certifications and some developer certifications. So regarding the public reports, these two are quite got a bit of a more social media attention, because in Smart Sheriff, this was an application that was mandated in South Korea, in the entire country. So by law, parents and children were forced to install this application. And the idea was that the parent would be able to control what applications the child should have installed on the phone, during what times the child should use the phone, and all these things, right? So typical political idea to get anything approved to try to save the children. But in practice, the implementation was really bad. So everything you should not do in a mobile application, you can see in these two reports here. These are the slides, and then we also gave a presentation about it, so you can watch all these for free on YouTube as well. And then the Chinese police apps, we will talk about them during this talk. These were more privacy related, because there's a Muslim minority in Xinjiang, so the Chinese government has some mobile apps that gather information about these citizens, with the idea of presumably reduce the likelihood of terrorist attacks. But the Human Rights Watch was wondering if some of this information that was being gathered was a human rights violation. So we helped Human Rights Watch to answer the questions, right? So basically they would determine if something was a human rights violation or not, which we had no idea about. And we basically just did the technical stuff, like trying to find problems or trying to answer the human rights activists' questions by looking at the decompiled applications. So we will talk about this during this presentation. There's a bunch of other pen test reports, so you can learn a lot about security for free just reading pen test reports, right? So let's talk about what we will be covering today. So we will start with CloudPets. This is going to be very interesting because the track record is quite epic. So first we will show what other people found on CloudPets, and then what we found, what the story was, to do a retest, and then what happened afterwards. And then we will talk about some of these Chinese police applications and what they do, what we found, and all that. And then also I will provide you with a little bit of background about the politics behind all this, right? So yeah, these applications, BXAQ and iJob, they are related to surveillance of ethnic minorities, but in different ways, right? So yeah, I will talk a bit more about this a little bit later. So let's start with CloudPets. the first thing is to explain what CloudPets are. So I could try to tell you, like, you press the paw on the toy and then the voice goes out, like the child can record a message and it goes to the parent and all this. But I think this would be a little bit boring. So I think it's going to be better if I show you the commercial for the toys, and then you will understand better what the toys are supposed to do. So share that. So yeah, I'll go to the beginning of this here.
CloudPets snuggle, CloudPets play, CloudPets share love every day. Send a message, send a song, play a game all day long. CloudPets, CloudPets.
Now with CloudPets, there are so many ways to send love through the cloud.
Welcome to Cloud Control. We have a story from Dad.
Story ready to send. Receive a story from your dad who's far away, or a lullaby from Mom every day. Send a game to play with CloudPets Cat, or trade messages with Grandma. Easy as that. You can send so much love with CloudPets for $39.99 plus $6.99 processing and handling. Each CloudPet connects to the special free app that will download to almost any smart device, so you can send stories, games, lullabies, and messages. You can call or log on at cloudpets.com. Smart devices not included. Each sold separately. Must be 18 or older to order.
CloudPets snuggle, CloudPets play, CloudPets share love.
So we already, whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. So we already played this one. And now I'm going to show you another one that's a little bit more technical about how the toys themselves work.
For family members who live far apart but want to stay close, try this cuddly option. Hi, I'm Laurie from TTPM, and this is CloudPets from Jay at Play. There are 5 animal styles to choose from, and we've got the teddy bear here. Each one works with a free app that lets parents, grandparents, kids, and other long-distance family members send and receive 10-second voice messages.
I really miss you and love you.
When you purchase a CloudPet stuffed animal, download the free app and register the animal. Then invite family and friends to download the app on their end. To record and send a message, the child presses the toy's right paw.
I can't wait to see you when you come to visit.
Through the app, determine who to send the message to and then send it. The recipient can then use his or her app to listen to the message and send back a response.
I can't wait to see you when you come to visit.
When your CloudPet has received a message, its red heart will light up and you can squeeze the toy's left paw to hear the message.
I can't wait to see you when you come to visit.
The CloudPet will only play one message at a time, but all the messages can be stored in the app. Only people who you have invited can send messages to your child's CloudPet. Also, a parent can choose to approve each message before it gets sent to the child's CloudPet. Also, through the app, kids can play games with their CloudPet or hear the CloudPet read them stories and sing lullabies. Additional app updates will deliver more interactive content. The CloudPet requires 3 AA batteries, which are not included. Now, the app is a free download from the App Store and Google Play. However, it is not compatible with all iOS and Android smartphones because it uses Bluetooth Low Energy technology. We tried testing it first on an LG G3 Android smartphone, and it was not compatible. While it did work on an iPhone 6 and a newer iPad, we had some trouble connecting the app to the CloudPet. We're not sure what the problem was, but eventually it did connect and work. So despite all of that, this is a cute product that would be great for long-distance grandkids and grandparents or kids and family members deployed in the military. It's just a cute and cuddly way to keep in touch, and it's for ages 3 and up.
I can't wait to see you when you come to visit.
For where to buy and current prices, visit TTPM and for family members who live far apart but want to stay close, try this cuddly.
Okay, so yeah, I think that's enough. So now you have an idea. Some of you maybe are wondering, like, Bluetooth Low Energy, danger, right? So yes, we already played this one as well. So the intended usage is that the parent is far from home, and then the parent can send messages to the child using a mobile app, and then the child receives these messages on the soft toy, right? The children can send messages to the parent through the soft toy, and then the parent receives messages on the mobile app. So you have a parent that is, working far away from home, but then they can still communicate with the toy, with the child through the toy, and then the toy plays, daddy's messages, and then the child can hug the toy and all this, right? So in principle, it's kind of a touching idea and so on, but the implementation was horrible, right? So we are going to see now all the problems with this. So the toys use Bluetooth Low Energy, and they use this to communicate with the mobile app, and then the mobile app is the one that will send the message to the cloud, and then from there the parent will be able to listen to it. So the toys have a microphone because they have to record the messages, and they also have a speaker through which the message of the parent will play, right? So the mobile app is on the parent phone, so it's away from the toy, and therefore it's out of Bluetooth range from the toy. So it sends and receives messages to and from CloudPet servers and Amazon S3. Now this is another typical area of screwing up, so just a heads up. And then the mobile app on the child device will close the toy, right? So it sends and receives messages to and from CloudPet servers and Amazon S3, and uploads and downloads messages to and from the toy using Bluetooth Low Energy. So Bluetooth Low Energy is basically used to communicate between the app and the toy and exchange messages back and forth. But then it's really the app that is going to push the messages to the cloud so that the parent application can listen to these messages, right? So what can possibly go wrong with this? Does anybody have any idea? Let me open the chat and see if we have any ideas about what can go wrong with this. Any guesses about any potential security problems with this? Nobody? 10 more seconds. No security problem with this? Don't you have like some scary idea about what could be done with some devices that children use and record messages and play messages? So far, no answer from the Facebook audience. Okay, so yeah, we will see a lot of problems, right? So let's talk a little bit first about the history, right? So this work, stuff that other people found before we even started looking at this, is that the Mongo database was available without authentication. So they had the database where all the messages that children send to parents and parents send to children. This entire Mongo database was exposed to the internet and without authentication. So what happened was that they got 3 ransom requests from different people. So yeah, the Mongo database was exposed to the internet without authentication. Unauthorized parties downloaded this database. They got the company behind the toys got 3 ransom requests. This was indexed by Shodan. Pretty much 1 million users, 1 billion user records at risk. And Spiral Toys, which is the CloudPets company, claimed to never have found any evidence of any breach, right? So that's the official response. Whereas this was a screenshot grabbed from the database while it was still exposed online, right? So you could see here like the username. So you get like the email addresses of the users, the session token, and you could also dump the messages as well from here. So it's really a mess, right? So password hashes, emails, links to all voice recordings from children and parents, and you can see a full write-up by Troy Hunt in his blog here. So this was really bad, right? Then they got the first ransom. So this was what the ransom looked like. So your database is backed up on your servers. On our servers, send 1 Bitcoin to this address, and then send your IP address to email kraken0@india.com. There's a couple more things here to this ransom, right? So this is the first ransom that they got. But the funny thing is, the multiple security researchers alerted the CloudPets company, Spiral Toys, several times before all this happened, right? So first you have here the good guys trying to report the problem so that they fixed it, but they didn't fix it, right? So this was from the end of 2016 to the beginning of 2017. There were multiple attempts to try to warn them. Then the first ransom happened a few days later. The original databases were deleted, and then ransom demand was left on the system, please read message, with a please read kind of message. And then one day later, they got 2 more ransoms, demand left for readme missing databases, and demand left for phone security, secure your stuff silly. So these were the 3 ransoms. They happened pretty quickly. And then on the 13th of January, then no databases were found to still to be publicly accessible. So this was about the cloud, but what about the toys, right? So what about the toy security? So Paul Stone did a lot of research on these toys. So this is a blog about his blog post describing all this, hacking unicorns web Bluetooth. Basically, he found that the toy has no built-in Bluetooth security features, no authentication for bonding or pairing between the device and the phone. And this means that anybody can connect to the toy as long as it is switched on. So now this becomes very scary because somebody on the street can connect to the toy and then tell the toy, yes, open the door, I'm your friend. And then if the child is alone at home, for example, they open the door to a stranger and some bad stuff could happen, right? So it can get pretty bad. He also found that the firmware upgrades are unencrypted, and the only validation is a CRC16 checksum. So pretty much very easy to bypass. So you could also upload your own firmware to the toy. So it's possible to remotely modify the toy's firmware as well, right? So pretty much all the bad stuff you could think about is what happened here. So I'm going to play this demo where he shows what he can do, right? So he's connecting a phone to the toy. And then in another demo, he will also use a computer, and you will see the demonstration of how he could connect to the toy and make the toy play any audio he wants and all this, right? So play that. See what I mean?
Exterminate! Annihilate! Destroy!
First I connect to the toy. Then I can make the toy start to record my voice. And then I can fetch the recording. And then play it back. Then I can make the toy start to record my voice. And then I
Okay, so yeah, pretty scary stuff because you can not only send any audio you want and play it, but you can also use the toy as a surveillance device. So you can listen to all the audio that is being played on the room and then play it on your computer, for example, right? As you saw in this demo. So pretty scary stuff. And yeah, so after all this, there were like multiple write-ups about the lack of security of the toy and the lack of use of built-in security features published. All attempts to warn Spiral Toys, which is the company behind CloudPets, failed. And then Spiral Toys confirms that they did not reply to the data breach emails, and rather they decided to fix them. So yeah, this is basically what the vendor said. So then the question was, what did they fix, right? So all these issues were reported to them. They got all these ransom requests. And the question was, what did they fix, right? So The Mozilla Foundation asked us to check if the toys are safe now. And this is where our work actually starts. I worked on this one together with Jesper. So he's from Sweden. So we do some Viking jokes and stuff. So I decided to have some, Viking reference here in his honor. So yeah, he looked more at the hardware stuff. So this is the toy. So he looked more at person. So he looked more at the firmware stuff, and this was the what the circuitry and all this looked like. And then the question is, what could possibly go wrong, right? So a picture of my office where here we can see the first things that we found, right? So the Tor domain is for sale and used over clear text HTTP. So basically, if any user is using the application and they click on the help, then the application navigates to a domain that is for sale. So anybody could purchase this domain and then be able to, for example, show a fake login page and harvest the credentials of all the CloudPet users, right? So this is pretty scary because it's kind of a possible kind of a man in the middle, but without even having to be in range on the same Wi-Fi or anything. You just buy the domain, and then you get all CloudPet, the credentials of all the CloudPet users in the world by having a fake login page in there, right? So anybody can purchase the domain and influence users, for example, prompting users for the CloudPet credentials, or for example, to prompt users to download malicious apps, right? So both things would be bad. And then another thing is, so the page is requested over clear text HTTP. So this alone makes it easier for a malicious attacker on the local network, for example, on local public Wi-Fi without guest isolation, to man in the middle and modify this to, they can trivially modify the Tor page to, for example, show a fake login page, right? So this allows to target users, ask for credentials, and download malicious apps. So the way this works is from the app, you would go to tap on go to CloudPets Tor, and then this would show you on the phone that this domain is for sale. You can see it here in small letters. This domain is for sale. Click here for more information. So pretty much anybody can buy this domain and attack users. So let's do a quick demo about this. So I'm basically using Verb here, and you can see as we go to the Tor, the domain is for sale, and this is the request goes over clear text HTTP. You can see this in Verb here, right? So yeah, and this was a demo recorded last year. I think the domain is still for sale. So pretty bad, right? Anybody can buy this domain and then put here a fake login page, and that's going to be the end of it, right? So yeah. And then what else did we find? We found also that Polstone's public proof of concept remains working without any changes. So basically you can go to Polstone's GitHub and using this from a compatible Android phone, we found that we can still upload arbitrary audio to the toy and play it back and all this, right? So basically strangers can still connect to the toys without authentication. They can push audio and play it on the toy, so anybody can interact with the child. I say something like open the door, I'm your friend, and then you have a stranger in the house, right? Or you can also download audio from the toy. So you can turn the toy into a spy device that tells you anything that is happening in the room where the toy is, right? So that's another possible attack scenario. So this is pretty bad. We also found that there's still no firmware protections in place. So a discovery was made during the initial setup of the device. The firmware is installed into the device from the app using Bluetooth Low Energy, but the installation process still has no verifications. There's no signature, there's no integrity checks, and the only protection is basically a CRC16 checksum, which you can provide a valid one, and then the whole check will be bypassed. So absolutely no security, right? So the CloudPet voice recordings are still word readable. So the audio recordings created from the device are still being saved on Amazon S3. So when users upload a new avatar or message, the application will post the data through the API and carries out a DNS lookup to CloudPet prod S3 Amazon SWS.com. And then the S3 bucket has no authorization or authentication in place, so there's no limitations when it comes to accessing the files placed on the basket, right? So also pretty bad stuff, like anybody can read anybody else's messages, pretty much. So in essence, we can summarize this by saying that all they fixed was the publicly exposed database, and everything else they didn't fix, right? So the CloudPet toys can store and replay voice messages. They expose the personal information of more than 8,000 customers, effectively turn the toys into potential spy devices. Mozilla asked for a retest of the issues, and we found that Spiral Toys didn't really fix much other than the MongoDB without authentication, and everything else that was found by other people, we found it was still not fixed. And then the good thing here is that the toys are now removed from Amazon, Walmart, and all other companies. So the company, I think, is now bankrupt, Spiral Toys. So at least some good story in terms of there was a company that didn't care about security or the security of its users, and the security community tried to warn this company to fix things. And they didn't, and then eventually there was some repercussion for this, right? Because sometimes what happens is a lot of companies don't care about security, put customers at risk, but then there's no real impact or drawback for this kind of behavior. So in this case, you can see they were removed from main places where people could buy the toys. So at least some good news in terms of there were repercussions for all this, right? With this, we can move on now to the police apps. So we have two applications, right? So iJob is basically an application that police officers use in China to gather information about citizens. So they collect, some information about them, like full name, the national ID, ethnicity, and other stuff. And then BXAQ is more kind of an install and grab application that, for example, you cross the border, they install this application on your phone, and then it grabs all your contacts, all your messages, all the applications you have installed, other stuff, and they send it to a computer in their local network, right? So they work in a slightly different way, right? So in this, iJob is used by the police officers, and the police officers enter information here manually. But this second application we will see is an application that they install on the phone, and then they gather all the information automatically, and then they uninstall the application, right? Once the information has been gathered from sent over to a server on the local network, they will uninstall the app so things look more or less normal. So what is the background behind these apps, right? So the Chinese government uses these applications to evaluate the threat level of their minority Muslim population in Xinjiang. So there's a region of China called Xinjiang where there's people that happen to be Muslim. And then the background is that Human Rights Watch requested a project funded by the Open Technology Fund to report and document the findings of the apps to investigate the potential violation of human rights. So the main question of Human Rights Watch was, is the system of systems iJob potentially compromising the human rights of a minority Chinese population? So this is a big question, right? And kind of difficult to answer. But what we did was assist them on the technical side to try to answer these questions. But it was basically them answering the questions, and we just looked at the applications in a technical way, right? So what is iJob, right? So how does the Chinese government use this? So the Integrated Joint Operations Platform, or iJob, is a policing program, right? So it's based on big data analysis, and the program aggregates data about people often without their knowledge. So it flags data that it deems potentially threatening to officials, and you can read more about it here on this link. So let me show a demo, because I'm not very good at politics, so that the human rights activists explain the background of this, and then this will make a little bit more sense. Talk about it.
I used to be one of those people, like, I got nothing to hide, I'm just a student, but I was very wrong. They're targeting everyone. As long as you're going out of your house, you're being surveilled.
In Xinjiang, in northwestern China, 13 million Turkic Muslims are already enduring extraordinary suppression at the hands of the Chinese government. And authorities there are building a surveillance state to be able to track their every move.
Across the northwestern province of Xinjiang, an estimated 1 million Chinese Muslims have vanished into a vast network of detention centers for what China calls re-education.
The region is now under what's probably the most intense government surveillance in the world.
Every 200 meters would have a police checkpoint, and then on top of that, there are all these checkpoints at public places wherever you go. If you're Uyghur, they stop you. They would just say, "Where's your ID? I want to check your ID." They would punch in the ID number, and then they would see everything about you.
One tool at the heart of Xinjiang's surveillance system is the IJOP, or the Integrated Joint Operations Platform. The IJOP has an app that's used by police and government officials to track extraordinary amounts of personal information about individuals, ranging from their religious habits to their blood type.
Human Rights Watch got a hold of a copy of the app and used a technique called reverse engineering to look at the source code, basically the design of the app. This is what it looks like when an officer pulls up an individual's profile. They enter the person's name, ID number, ethnicity, and then the officer takes a photo of the person's ID card to see if that matches the person's face. As you scroll, you see more information is being collected from the person, including their address, how tall they are, their blood type, their educational level, their occupation, their political affiliation, information about their car, license plate, driver's name, driver's ID card number.
On its surface, most of this information looks like standard fare for police, but as we dig deeper into the app, we can see that ordinary, routine, legal behavior is being treated by authorities as suspect.
This is what it looks like when the IJOP system has flagged someone whose phone number the system has lost track of. The IJOP system sends an alert to government officials to go and investigate the reason why that phone number has gone missing, and note if this person is suspicious and requires further investigation. Or here's another example. This is a report that the IJOP system sends to government officials about someone who used an unusual amount of electricity. The report includes the date in which the unusual amount of electricity used was logged by the system, how much electricity was used, what was the meter reading, and what is the usual range of electricity used. Then the government official is required to go and investigate this person.
If you use WhatsApp or Viber or Telegram, that might be considered suspicious. If you go out the back door of your house instead of the front, the police might turn up to investigate. The list goes on. The information from the app feeds into a central system and combines with information from other surveillance systems, including CCTV cameras that rely on facial recognition software, and even Wi-Fi sniffers that are used as people walk through checkpoints to pull information off their phones. The IJOP system aggregates all this data about people, flags those it deems suspicious, and sends alerts to nearby officials. These dubious criteria are being used to identify large numbers of people, many of whom are then arbitrarily locked up.
In total, I spent about a month in different jails. I wasn't officially accused of anything or charged with anything. The official paperwork said something like, I was arrested under the suspicion of disrupting the societal order. Then after that, I was basically under house arrest. because they marked my ID card.
It's time for the Chinese government to stop persecuting perfectly legal behavior. It's time for the Chinese government to end its repression of Turkic Muslims in Xinjiang, and it's time for it to dismantle this surveillance state.
Okay, so hopefully this makes a little bit more sense now about why we take this application. So the iJob was originally developed by China Electronics Technology Group Corporation, which is a state-owned military contractor. This company was set up in 2017 as a research center at UTS, the University of Technology in Sydney, and they are primarily focused on areas such as artificial intelligence, mapping, and big data. So you can see it's all kind of related to what the video was talking about all these facial recognition of all the CCTV cameras everywhere. So pretty much the Chinese government knows where everybody is at any given time from these cameras, right? So once we started looking at this, the first problem for us, of course, was that we don't speak any Chinese. So the app is written for Chinese police in Chinese, obviously. So we had to translate it so that we know, you know, what the application is doing and so on. So basically, we had to decompile the application, then translate the strings.xml with Google Translate, and then we recompile the APK again with the translated version. And then we have a broken English application version. It's still not perfect English, but it is much better than Chinese for us. So at least we have more or less an idea about what the application is doing, right? So this is one of the things that we did. Another thing that we did for safety was to set up Tor and try to, you know, avoid any request going directly to Chinese servers from our own IP address, right? So we refrain from any form of behavior that could be perceived as noisy and alert the maintainers of the application. So set up Tor in a test environment, set up Burp to use Tor as an outbound proxy, and then man in the middle of the app to send the traffic through Burp, right? So we could inspect traffic, but without leaking our IPs to the Chinese government, right? So that's another precaution. And then the main question was, well, this iJob application is the application that Chinese police use themselves, but they're logging into a backend system, and we don't have credentials to check that, right? So we had to fake that the user was authenticated. So we had to modify the app again so that all the different activities of the application were exported. So we modified basically the Android manifest, export all activities, so that they would be able to see all the screens that the application had, right? So we modified the application, we tweaked the build and provided the modified build to the human rights activists. And then we also provided a list of ADB commands to launch the activities. So the human rights activists could launch the different activities and then decide if, you know, like a certain screen is gathering very like human rights sensitive kind of data or not. And then they would make those kinds of decisions. Well, we just provided support on the technical side. So reversing the application is something we did. Translating the application is something we did. Exporting all the activities is another thing that we did, so they could see what's there after the login without even having credentials, right? So the activists could run our script to review all the after login screens quickly without having to, you know, spend a lot of time with this. So what did we find here? So the new collection activity tracks the blood type and political views. So human rights question was as follows: recording of height and blood type. We want to know to what extent the authorities can justify this by saying this is all for counterterrorism. So far, I see only a few mentions of terrorism. So that was a quote from the human rights activists. So iJob indulges in data collection, likely for anomaly detection. It is assumed that the goal of this data collection is to have more reference data, so namely to mine and gather data on individuals. And then with increasingly strong indicators that the data does not match the information from the headquarters, they may reveal more suspicious and problematic subsets of users and actual people and groups. So this is a snippet of the code, right? So this was the Java file where this was, and here we can see all the information that they were gathering, right? So religious atmosphere, religious name other, political status other, birthday, height, blood, nation, relationship, lots of things, card number, destination country. So a lot of information, but the height and blood type they were a little bit concerned about. So yeah, this is kind of the broken English version. So you can see some of the strings could not be translated, but others you can see here: height, blood type, degree, and so on. Status, political. So this is how this was recorded. And then the ranking system was a little bit different. So in this case, we used proven when we could prove that this was the case. So in this case, it was proved that the application was gathering height and blood type. So this is why the finding was proven. And then another thing was that the application receives electricity consumption data from the headquarters, right? So this is another thing that we proved. And Human Rights Watch wanted to know about applications data on electricity consumption, right? So authorities logging people's electricity use. How is this problematic? So under the view of Human Rights Watch, this is problematic because the authorities are logging everyone's electricity use. They are trying to see if there's a reason for abnormal level of electricity use, and the application employs a database which fetches various utility data about an individual. So basically, they know how much electricity everybody is using in the country. And then the way this works is that a police officer receives a new task from the headquarters, and then they can file a report to investigate the occurrence of unusual power consumption. So they can do so at any given date and mark any reasons for the same. And this prepares the ground for further investigation by the public security agency. So basically, a police officer is going to go to somebody's home to investigate, right? So in case of a false positive, the officer can file in the actual electricity meter value, and a justification by law enforcement might be to monitor the use of electricity for cryptocurrency mining or growing cannabis indoors, among other possibilities, right? So these types of activities can lead to increased consumption. This is how it looked in the app. So you can see here the broken English application. We have phone number, reported object name, electricity meter number, power address, power abnormal date 1, power consumption degree 1, power abnormal date 2. So they gather all these different consumption metrics on the application, right? So that's very clear. So what do you think? Should the government be able to monitor how much electricity everybody uses? Is this a privacy intrusion? And can these stop terrorist attacks? Any thoughts about this? Okay, we have a question here about before. With the advent of IoT and most of the manufacturing resources are placed in China, how worried should the public be for their data being siphoned by apps such as iJob and BXAQ? Well, it's a legitimate concern. You will see that some Chinese phones make some kind of strange requests to random IP addresses, and you never know if it's the company, if it's a server owned by the company, but then the company has some affiliations with the Chinese government. We never know, right? So there's always this plausible deniability, but the possibility is definitely there, right? Any other similar toys in the market? I'm not too sure about similar toys in the market, but what I do know is that most IoT devices are typically vulnerable to a lot of stuff showed with CloudPets. So yeah, this is, there's in IoT devices, there's always a lot of problems because typically the developers are not very aware of physical threats or anything like this. So they will make things work without authentication or anything else. Okay, so I see no questions about this, but this is something to think about, right? So should the government be able to monitor how much electricity everybody uses? Is this a privacy intrusion? And can this stop terrorist attacks, right? Because maybe if somebody is making a bomb, maybe for some reason they might need more, electricity, and maybe this is helpful. How can we prevent or protect ourselves from other similar apps? Use a VPN, right, would be the answer. So if you always use a VPN, then at least you are not showing your IP address to the servers. But even then, there's a lot of other things, like if the phone, depending on how deep in the phone is the threat actor you're worried about, it's kind of complicated, right? Because even if you use a VPN, this will make your activity more hidden, but at the same time, if there's something in the phone, it can still maybe report your ID or your real IP or the Wi-Fi network you are connected and other data to some cloud endpoint. So using a VPN is not a guaranteed perfect method of protecting yourself from privacy intrusion, but it's a start, right? Okay, so let's continue because there's still a few slides and demos to go through. So according to Human Rights Watch, they had doubts about the tools. So specifically, they say tools they use and possess, right? So this was another feature, right? So reporting feature for problematic tools. So they had a section in the application to collect information about the tools they use and possess. An option under electronic appears to refer to problematic tools. This includes tools that may be implemented to make explosives. So they are gathering information about, potential interest in making explosives and stuff like this. Officers can submit a report to the headquarters about explosive materials, and then the officer can ask for an investigation on the matter, and then this investigation can be further handed over and carried on by the public security agency. So this is how the reporting feature of problematic tools look like. So you can see here, is there a blasting tool or material? Yes, no, exception, reason, add new home appliances, renovation, farming, and things like this, right? So they were collecting information about this, and then we can only speculate the reasons, but that was the fact. And then here we have assumed, so this is a lower level of assuredness. So PII collection via misfound trail feedback activity. So Human Rights Watch was also curious about the misfound trail feedback activity. This refers to when someone's gone off the grid, so suddenly stopped using their phone, right? So they are also tracking this when a phone suddenly stops being used. So reviewing the activity and data processing from the decompiled source code provides evidence of tracking this information when a phone stops being used. So the following list summarizes the fields used by the app for this purpose. So you have add user, add username, expression description, latitude, longitude, right? So they have the coordinates of where the phone stopped being used. And then we check all these with ADB commands launching the different activities, right? So first we modify the application, so all activities were exposed, so we can see all the screens that the application would normally only show after the user logged in. But because we could not log in, we just exported all the activities, and they just showed all the screens with empty fields, right? So this resulted in the following PII collection form being rendered. So you can see here all the data being gathered, and then this is more kind of information like misfound trail feedback view model and yeah, so upon closer inspection of the decompiled source code of the application, it was found that this activity makes use of the misfound trail feedback view model. And then by trailing this the sequence, we can see that the sequence submits the information to the API in a fashion illustrated next and making use of a misfound trail REST entity, right? So we could see some traces about this, like when a phone stops being used, that this was somehow being reported to the API, right? So then there's like some commands used to get all the fields and so on. And then the question is, how does the officer communicate with the headquarters, right? So I see there are terms like immediate arrest or detain for investigations. Are these decisions made by the officers or headquarters? So most likely the communication and some form of, we assume this is some form of chat exchange using XMPP, because we found like some XMPP code in the code, right? So in this login fragment, we can see here that they are talking to some XMPP host and protocol is here, right? So they are doing some, you know, there's some chat kind of feature on the application where the police officer is maybe talking to somebody in the headquarters using XMPP, right? So yeah, it's unclear how exactly these variables are used in the context of the app. They are indicators that information is pushed by the headquarters and all this, right? So this is basically, yeah, all kind of the same. So in essence, the iJob has multiple sources or sensors for intel, so CCTV cameras with facial recognition and night vision, Wi-Fi sniffers that track computers, smartphones, and other network devices. So whenever your phone is asking for wireless networks, it knows. These Wi-Fi sniffers track all that to kind of identify you. And then there's other sources like license plate numbers, citizen ID card numbers, and so on. Then vehicle ownership, health insurance, family planning, banking, and legal records. They combine all these to know as much as they can about the citizens, right? So the current status of the iJob is basically that there's a few checks on police surveillance powers. So basically, this is not like Europe where we have privacy laws and stuff. Like in China, they are pretty much like, you know, they don't have this kind of stuff. So there's no effective privacy against the government instructions in China. So China has no unified privacy or data protection law to protect or personally identifying information from its use. And there's very little information about how securely the data collected by iJob is stored, and no formal system for people to find out what information is held about them on iJob, right? So this is a picture of the Wi-Fi sniffers. So these are the data collecting machines. And yeah, so it's kind of unclear how all this is being used, but you can kind of get an idea from what we covered. And yeah, this was all carried out in collaboration with the Human Rights Watch team. So they were asking all the human rights questions, and we tried to do our best from the technical side to find any evidence to what they were asking about. And that is basically how it worked, right? So the team was technically driven and an unbiased investigating entity trying to answer their questions, but without taking sides, just looking at the data and conveying the data to the human rights activists, right? So we work from a premise of technical evidence based on reverse engineering operations. So yeah, this is a picture of this. So now let's move on to the BXAQ app. So I'll show a quick demo here. Yeah, so this is widely known as the Fengkai, and it's basically an application used to scan the device in which it is installed, even on tourist phones, right? So it is supposedly used in specific regions of China by law enforcement, and it has the potential to gather and manage massive amounts of data about that specific group. So let me show you the demo, because it will be shorter time, and this will explain it better.
Chinese border guards are installing surveillance malware on tourists' phones. An investigative report by the New York Times, The Guardian, Motherboard, Süddeutsche Zeitung, and German public broadcaster NDR has uncovered a systematic program to harvest data from the phones of tourists entering Xinjiang. For The Guardian, he had been alerted by an international travel agent and by tourist information while in Kyrgyzstan that something would happen to his phone at the border. He said they expected a GPS tracker would be installed. He checked his phone after he got it back and found the malware. In most cases, the Android app is uninstalled by authorities before the phone is returned to the tourist. However, some tourists have still found the app installed on their phones.
So, yeah, this is basically the story. So they gave us the APK. So we looked at the APK and we followed a white box methodology because we could decompile the app and see all the source code and so on. And yeah, it was again Open Technology Fund sponsored this test, but we worked again with Human Rights Watch. So the app isn't available on Google Play. We basically got the APK that the human rights activists found, and they gave us this APK, and then we tried to, not raise suspicion and not alert the owners and maintainers of the app. Right, so we were supposed to again use Tor, don't delete our IPs and so on. So we found, that the application was collecting some data, for example, calendar entries, phone contacts, country codes, all the information from the phone, the IMEI, IMSI, and all these other stuff. Text messages sent and received were also but only with the text message, and the phone context is already scary, but also the calendar entries was kind of interesting. Information about the current base station, used hardware like MAC addresses, and then they got information about the installed applications on the phone. So it was in an MD5 hash of the applications and checking all this. And yeah, so I'm just going to keep all this. So it's basically that's what it was gathering, right? So we found a lot of data being gathered, and it's interesting that it uses SMS permissions to dump all stored text messages and include them in the report, phone numbers. It also saved all the data to the SD card, which is kind of very insecure, but I don't know. And then they pushed. So they grabbed all the data and then zip it on the SD card and then send it to a server, right? So all extract the information, bundle as a zip file without applying any password protection, and then upload it to a Wi-Fi server, right? So this is basically, some details here about all this, and then we could see that the application was ignoring all SSL warnings as well. So you could, if you were in the same police network, you would be able to man in the middle and see all this traffic. So all hostname verifier is just a bad implementation. And before you could see that they were using XMPP with the IP address, so no SSL either. And this is basically how the application looks. And yeah, we are kind of out of time, so I'm kind of jumping through this a little bit because this is basically what we found, right? So they contact some servers on the local network. So this is the local server contacted by BXAQ, and this is the public server contacted by iJog, right? So this is a public IP address, and this is a local IP address on the police network. So yeah, with this, we can say that this application was gathering all this data, and then from there, Human Rights Watch raised the concern and tried to do all this awareness campaign and so on. But we just worked on the technical side, right? So the ones that really risked their lives and did all the hard work were the human rights activists, no more. So the applications that we have covered here are part of our mobile course. So if somebody takes our mobile course, we are giving one in 44Con in next week. So this is the registration link if you're interested in that. If somebody's interested, there's also a 40% discount now for Black Friday on the store. So if you get the mobile course, that way you also get all these Chinese applications as well as CloudPets. So all the applications I've covered in this talk as well as Smart Sheriff and others. And if you just want to see some webinar or the workshop tomorrow or something else, just ping admin and we can give you access to some of those free things. That's fine as well. With that, we are out of time. So if anybody has any question, let me know.
Yeah, Mr. Abraham. So there was a question asked, what's your take on current COVID contact tracing apps? Does it have similar behaviors?
Well, by definition, yes, right? Because with COVID, what you want to know is who has been in contact with who else, right? So this worked really well in South Korea because they could trace very quickly who was infected, and then from the contact of the phones or which other phones were closer to that person, they could contact the other people. And this made it, so this is good for like stopping COVID. In South Korea, it worked really well, at least at the beginning. I'm not sure now what's the status there. So for stopping COVID, it's pretty good, but then these features, I know in Europe, they are doing it anonymously somehow. They are trying to, like share this data with the authorities, but not really, without kind of personal information, just the phone numbers to contact the people or something like this, right? But this is kind of, in the end, somebody has the information and they can correlate everything, right? So it's difficult. So digital electronics is evitable, but any idea how to make ourselves feel better when data sent to different countries, especially big ones? Yeah, I think the only solution is really to use a VPN, and then try to have as few apps as possible and only apps that encrypt data and so on. Is kind of the only advice that comes to mind. This is really difficult to solve because like at the end of the day, like your Google account, Facebook account, Twitter, all the social media, you kind of have to give your personal data, your phone number, and they kind of know where you live from the the Wi-Fi networks that you are probing already, even if you don't know the address. So they are too deep in the phone, so it's kind of difficult to stop this, right? But yeah, using a VPN and trying to limit the apps that you use, that is going to help and reduce the impact of it. Any other questions?
I don't think there is any further questions. Anyways, thank you, Abraham.